Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about this conversation that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this is once again going to be over the conversation over the Terrence Bud Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. situation, which I think I already kind of talked about once, but I thought that I would kind of talk about it again just because it's been getting a little bit hotter lately in terms of conversation, and it's been one of the more recent conversations. And on top of that, there's also going to be a little bit of conversation over that of the NFL playoffs because, of course, for those of you that did not know, Terrence Bud Crawford, who is a big Green Bay Packers fan, he kind of poked fun at that of Errol Spence Jr. as of recent and also at the Dallas Cowboys and basically said that, oh, wow, we're actually winning this, or, we're winning this pretty good. The Dallas Cowboys must be winning overall because of some injuries, huh? And basically, of course, what he was assuming at is that, basically the same way that Errol Spence Jr. claimed that he had a cataract injury or that he had an eye injury in that of the Terrence Bud Crawford fight. Basically he was insinuating that. And of course, for those of you that also did not hear, Errol Spence Jr. recently had an operation or another surgery on his eye for an alleged cataract. And let me state this. I'm not stating that in my view that I believe that Errol Spence Jr. necessarily faked the surgery or anything like that. I do think that it was a real operation. I do think that it more than likely was a real surgery. Now the question is, if you were going to ask me, is that, was it severe enough to the point to where it really changed the outcome of the fight that much? And in my view, I'm sorry, but I'm just not buying it. The fact that they give inspections, eye inspections, and health inspections and physicals right before a fight, and on top of that, it was the biggest fight of your career, and you already pulled out of the Manny Pacquiao fight about a year or two prior because you were not going to risk a possible loss or your health to Manny Pacquiao, when it came down to it, and you were able to pull out of that fight. What would have been a few more months or however long it would have taken for this fight? Now, of course, this fight was very tough to make, so maybe in Errol Spence Jr.'s mind, he said overall, I don't want to back out of this. I think that this is a great fight. But at the end of the day, if your eye really was that severe or if it was that compromised, then you push this fight back because this was the biggest fight of your career. So if it was that compromised, what that tells me is that Errol Spence was either A, that arrogant, or B, that stupid, or maybe a little bit of both. But I'm not buying it. I just don't see it, in my personal view. Not with the biggest fight of your career. It just is what it is. But anyways, Boxing Ego is going to kind of talk about it a little bit here. I just thought that it would be very particularly interesting to talk about. And the message of this video also is going to explain why it is very important not to really be a fanboy or really, to be honest, a fan of anyone particularly in general. Because especially if you're going to be an analyzer like myself, you really can't be a fan of anyone in general, or at least not a major fan, and I like to not be a fan of anyone in general. Of course, there are certain fighters or certain athletes or certain teams that I prefer to watch over others because I find their style more appealing, or I think that they're more elite than that of the others. But at the end of the day, I always like to say that I don't like to be a fan of any of these guys as well, because just like Boxing Ego here, what you're going to see is that eventually once you become a fan of somebody, the more illogical points are going to start to come in, the over emotionality, and eventually what's going to happen is that you're going to start defending them and have a certain amount of bias, when with you not even realizing it. So that's why, once again, a lot of the times, you have to take a look at yourself and you have to take a look at it and say, okay, am I really being the most logical and objective as I can be possible? Am I really overall, doing myself justice? Am I being honest here? Or is there a little bit of bias within me? Would I really have the same standards if the shoe would be on the other foot? And a lot of the times it's very hard for, people overall to kind of admit that to themselves because we never want to admit that we're having a little bit of bias. But that's why I like to review a lot of these LDBC and new media channels because they always love to tell you this stuff about how logical and objective they are, and how, our main objective is to be honest and, our pound for pound list and all sorts of stuff. We are the real, fair and logical objective rankings. No, they're not. All they are is a pro-black American cult. And Ego very clearly was rooting for that at Errol Spence Jr. because Errol Spence Jr. is a black American fighter with that of the black American promoter, that of Al Heyman. And I get a lot of these people saying that, oh, you're wrong about these LDBC and new media channels. They're not, a pro-black cult. They're just a pro-PBC. Right, why do you think that they're pro-PBC? Why do you think that they're pro-PBC? Could it be because Al Heyman is the only boxing promoter out there that is that of a black man that is owning them. And overall, don't get me wrong, he's doing a great job in my view. And I think that Al Heyman brings a lot of great things to the table. That's not me saying that he doesn't have any faults or negatives, but so does every promoter, you know. But at the end of the day, I like the PBC. I think that the PBC has done a great job. I think that they have a great roster. And I think that you could debate that Al Heyman treats his fighters a bit better than some of the other promoters out there if you really wanted to go there. You know, at least certainly better than Bob Arum. But, you know, when it comes down to it, one could debate that. But at the end of the day, that's the reason why they like the PBC and also that of certain fighters from that of the PBC. So once again, don't get it wrong. You know, a lot of these guys, they come on my channel and they say, oh, you're wrong about them. You know, they're just pro PBC. There's a reason why they're so pro PBC. And no problem. I think that Al Heyman is a great promoter as well. But at the end of the day, just don't sit here and tell me overall that, you know, they're just pro PBC and they don't really have that much of a racial bias. Yes, they do. Every LDBC in the media channel has a clear racial agenda and bias. It just is what it is. But anyways, you know, let's get this started. Let's see what Mr. Boxing Ego has to say.
Bang! Terrence Crawford takes aim at Errol Spence Jr. He relates it to a NFL football game between the Green Bay Packers and the Dallas Cowboys. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing.
And listen, I've been saying this for years about the Dallas Cowboys. The thing is that they need to really get rid of Dak Prescott. I've been saying it for years, but many people, of course, you know, you don't really know where to look or what quarterback to get better. But the point is about the Dallas Cowboys is that they have a lot of talent right now, and they could potentially make a Super Bowl run. But the thing that's stopping them is that damn idiot at the quarterback position with Mr. Dak Prescott. And I'm not saying that there's not other issues. I'm not saying that Mike McCarthy may be the best coach for them later on down the line, but he did get them to the playoffs at least the past 2 or 3 seasons, and they've always been a disappointment, and it usually is surrounded by the fact that Dak Prescott, he's just not that smart of a quarterback. And in that game against the Green Bay Packers, you know, they did score a lot on the defense for sure. But for allegedly being the #1 offense in the league, when it comes down to it, they performed terribly. And really, it was mainly Dak Prescott. He got intercepted twice, and he was just throwing almost damn near interceptions a lot through that game. There was one play where he threw a lateral, and it was almost intercepted. And it's unfortunate for Dak because I think that he's talented. But either A, he's just a complete player that does not perform well in headlights, you know, or in that big pressurized situations, or he's just not that smart of a quarterback. And I think that it's a little bit of both. I just don't think that he has the highest level of IQ. I've seen him playing for the past several years. I thought the first season that he had a lot of potential. And of course, that first season, he blew it to the Green Bay Packers. But now that I take a look at Dak Prescott's career, I only believe that he's ever won one playoff game against Russell Wilson and the Seahawks. If I'm wrong about that, one of you guys would have to correct me. But Dak Prescott, in my view, needs to go.
Subscribe.
Another quarterback that also has to go is that of Kirk Cousins and the Minnesota Vikings. You know, because they have a lot of talent as well. Kirk Cousins needs to go because Kirk Cousins is never going to leave you anywhere. He is probably one of the biggest choke artists that I've personally ever seen in sports.
Made this graphic. Terrence Crawford had posted this tweet. You guys see Terrence Crawford? It says, "Ooh wee, this game looking like me and Errol Spence Jr. They must have injuries. That's why we winning, huh?" So, in case you watch football, or even in case you don't watch football, the Dallas Cowboys are losing to the Green Bay Packers. Now, Terrence Crawford has been a long-time Green Bay Packers fan, so he used that pretty much to make an analogy of this night, where he defeated, hey, stat that kid, hey, man down, Errol Spence Jr. So he's using that to taunt and throw up in his face, I beat you. And because they're in like quarter 3 as of me recording the video.
Well, he's not using it really as a taunt to say that I beat you. What he's using it as a taunt is to say basically that stop making excuses. That's basically what he's saying. And understandably, I know that Errol Spence has had car wrecks and all this sort of stuff. But listen, I just don't know how far into that excuse I can really go. Because at the end of the day, Errol Spence Jr., he had that car accident like what? At least a major one like what? 2-3 years ago? And at the end of the day, he came back and he had a great performance over Danny Garcia. Didn't quite look the same, but still had a great performance. And then later on had the best performance of his career against Yordenis Ugas and broke his orbital eye bone. So the point is that I can only take a look at this so far and say, okay, how injured was your eye actually? Because if you really were not the same fighter at all, or if you really had that bad of an eye injury, wouldn't you have put off the fight? Or on top of that, wouldn't you have not looked as dominant against Yordenis Ugas? I mean, Yordenis Ugas literally, after that dominant performance that Errol Spence put on, he's nowhere near the same fighter. I mean, Mario Barrios damn near knocked him out, and of course he won a unanimous decision over him. So that goes to show you the amount of damage that Errol Spence Jr. was able to put on him. But at the end of the day, once again, I can only go so far into this excuse. And if Boxing Ego is going to say this about it, well, then no problem. But then how come other fighters like Vasily Lomachenko and Canelo Alvarez, when they had alleged injuries, like when Lomachenko said that he had a shoulder injury, and Lomachenko, by the way, has had shoulder injuries in the past. He completely tore and dislocated his shoulder in that of the Jorge Linares fight and needed a legitimate surgery on that and was out for months after that. So how come we're not giving Vasily Lomachenko the same excuse then in that of the Teofimo Lopez fight? How come we're not hearing this from Boxing Ego? How come we're not hearing that, overall Canelo had calluses on his hands because he also had a legitimate surgery? So why are we not then giving them these excuses, but then with Errol Spence Jr., it's okay to give him that excuse?
The game isn't over, but they're still in the lead. The Green Bay Packers, a.k.a. Terrence Crawford, the team he's been rooting for. So he's comparing that to his fight with Errol Spence. Now, this is why I tell you guys, you must subscribe to the channel for the best in the business. If you don't want the best, then you don't want my channel. But if you're looking for the best boxing content in YouTube, my name is Ego. I've been covering this sport for over 10 years. And what he's referring to is Errol Spence donned a patch over his eye and recently came out and informed the public that he had cataracts or a cataract over his eye, and it even affected his performance versus Terrence Crawford.
Yes, that's what he's referring to. Let's not sugarcoat it. What he's referring to is that he believes that Errol Spence Jr. is making excuses, and he is.
He says basically his vision was impaired, he was somewhat blinded, and he says, why do you think I got attacked or hit with so many jabs and hooks? Like he was saying,
the reason why you got hit with so many hooks and so many jabs, Mr. Errol Spence Jr., is because you ran right into them. And every single fault that you've had in the past was not only shown in that fight, but it was exacerbated in that fight. And the reason, you know why it was, is because Errol Spence Jr. got in the ring with someone that was even better than what he had expected. Like I said, if Errol Spence Jr. was going to win that fight, and I had predicted him to win the fight because I thought that he would be a little bit too strong and too defensively responsible, and I thought that at times Crawford would not be able to handle the shots because I didn't think that he had quite enough to chin, and on top of that, I thought that he wouldn't quite have enough power to deal with that of Errol Spence Jr. But in the end, when Crawford showed, and I said this in my fight prediction many times, I've said this many times, if Crawford showed early on that he could compete with Errol Spence Jr. and back him off and pretty much go at times toe-to-toe, or at least exchange with him at times, or be in the middle of the ring and hurt Errol Spence Jr. and be able to overall back him off, that fight is over. Because there's no other way that Errol Spence Jr. is going to win that fight. He has to break him down. He has to break him down. There's no other way. And when Terrence Crawford showed that he had better defense, probably the better chin in the fight, I already knew that Crawford was going to have the superior hand speed and reach and foot speed, but Spence was going to have to break him down incrementally. And if he wasn't going to be able to do that, there's no way for Errol Spence Jr. to win that fight. It isn't that he's a one-dimensional fighter in my view. I don't think that Errol Spence has ever been a one-dimensional fighter. But Crawford made him look so one-dimensional because there's no other way for Errol Spence to win that fight. He can't beat him in the middle of the ring or in the long range. Crawford is quicker in both his feet and his hand speed. On top of that, he has the longer reach. He clearly has the better head movement and foot movement. So at the end of the day, and he's the better counterpuncher. So Errol was going to have to try to break him down. And as soon as Crawford, his accuracy showed out very early on in that fight. And then on top of that, he just showed that, he had the level of power to hurt Errol Spence that badly, especially that early on. Like I said, once round 2 happened, that fight was over.
basically that's uncharacteristic. Now,
But like I said, there's a lot of people saying that, oh, Errol Spence didn't look anywhere near the same. I don't think that I can say that. I'm not saying that maybe he wasn't a bit rusty or that maybe that the year and a half layoff didn't have an effect on him to a degree. But at the end of the day, Errol Spence Jr.'s lack of head movement, at least compared to other fighters, that's always been an issue with him. Him being not the fastest fighter in the world, that's always been an issue with him. Him not being a superior counterpuncher, at least compared to someone like a Terrence Bud Crawford, that's always been an issue with him. So at the end of the day, the faults that I've always seen with Errol Spence Jr., they were shown in this fight. It's just that they were so much more exacerbated and exposed because when you get in the ring with a level of a fighter like a Crawford, or you finally get in the ring with someone that is looked to be that 50-50 level matchup, and they can compete with you in terms of the athleticism and the level of power, you're done. There's nothing that you can do. So that's why I say Errol Spence's only chance was to be stronger, more defensively responsible, and break him down over time. There was no other chance that he had. I thought that it would still be enough because Errol Spence I thought was going to be able to break him down, and I didn't think Crawford would be able to handle it as well as that of vice versa. But turned out, turned out it was exactly the opposite.
as far as Terrence Crawford taking this shot at Errol Spence Jr., I mean, he's his own man, to each his own. He won the fight fair and square. He did nothing wrong. He showed up on the night. Errol Spence, seemingly everything that could go wrong went wrong for Errol Spence. Many people have different theories as to what the causation was. Was Errol Spence weight drain? I've seen people bring up.
I'm not also buying the weight drain excuse. I'm not saying that Errol Spence Jr. that he could not make 154. See, the thing is, to me, is this. I don't think that Errol Spence had anything majorly debilitating in that fight. I think that he had things to where maybe you could say that in his mind he feels like he could be a better version of himself, which who knows, maybe could potentially win him the rematch, but I just don't think so. Like I said, I've never seen a fighter get their ass kicked that bad from pillar to post and then stopped in that fashion and they just win. And to me, the excuses that some people are making, or at least the points that some people are making, I just don't think that they're enough to say that that's the reason why Errol Spence lost the fight. Now, had Errol Spence clearly had an injury, or had he only had one arm, or clearly something was up, then I would get it. But Errol Spence, I think, would prefer to be at 154, sure. But I don't think that he was killing himself to get there. I just think that it probably is a little bit more uncomfortable than what it used to be.
His ribs. Some people said he entered the fight with a rib injury. Errol Spence says the
Right.
cataracts, things like.
Right. And once again, why are you saying overall with Errol Spence Jr. that these things are not excuses? Because when Lomachenko said that he had a shoulder injury in the Teofimo Lopez fight, it was an excuse. When Canelo said that he had calluses, overall, and that's the reason why he lost to Dimitri Bivol and looked lesser, it was an excuse. And in my view, it was somewhat of an excuse, even though he probably had those. But Canelo had just looked lesser in my view because he's probably a little bit older and more wore down. It just is what it is. And on top of that, I don't think he expected Dimitri Bivol to be as good as what he was, or at least as, powerful as what he was. I think he knew he was an A-grade level fighter, but I think that Canelo thought that he was going to be able to bully him throughout the entire fight, and that's why he gained more muscle mass, and that eventually he thought that he was eventually going to retreat. Well, that's not what Dimitri Bivol did.
That. So I'll leave that for you guys to decide. But I think it goes without saying that the Errol Spence that we seen on that fateful night, and this is not to take away from Terrence Crawford, who was a terrific fighter, but the version of Errol Spence that we seen, I think it's okay and safe to say that it was not the typical performance that you have seen from him. And I understand.
No shit, it wasn't the typical performance because he was undefeated and now he got his ass kicked. No shit. But was it not the typical performance because he did have something majorly wrong with him in the fight, or was it not the typical performance because Crawford just proved to be better in every single category? And I'm gonna go with the latter because I'm sorry, but all these major excuses, oh, a cataract in the eye, and I'm not saying once again that Spence didn't have a thing up with his eye to where the doctor said you probably don't have to get it fixed now, but later on down the line you're probably going to have to do something. I think that something was probably up with his eye to the degree to where it probably maybe was a nagging thing, or maybe he probably needed to get it fixed later on down the line. Just like Crawford said, there's some stuff in his body that maybe eventually he'll have to get surgeries on. you know. But at the end of the day, a lot of athletes are dealing with stuff like that. But do I think that it was debilitating to the point to where that's why he got his ass kicked that bad? No.
Understand this hurts the Bud Buddies because they're like, no, you're making excuses.
You are making excuses. And the nerve to call anyone butt buddies right now when you clearly, you know, are having sex with Errol Spence Jr. and his camp behind the scenes with the way that you protect him. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
You're making excuses. Oh, ego. But on my channel, this the great thing about YouTube. You can agree with me. You don't have to agree with me. I could really care less. It will not.
Yes, you can really care less. That's why you went on a live stream calling all the Terrence Bud Crawford fans virgins, saying that they've never touched a woman before, and all this other shit. You clearly don't care.
Stop.
And listen, I like Boxing Ego. I like him a lot, to be honest with you. I think that out of a lot of the other LDBC new media channels, that he has a good little channel. But let's stop the bullshit.
The job that I do. And the elephant in the room is I am of the belief that Errol Spence had some things going wrong outside of the realm of Crawford being a great fighter. And
I think once again that if we're going to talk about anything that is that bad, I think that maybe the year and a half layoff probably affected that of Errol Spence Jr. That's about as far as I'm willing to go. Because I'm sorry, but apparently you had all these issues. You had a major cataract, and then on top of that, you're killing yourself and you're really weight draining yourself and all that other stuff, and you didn't call off the fight. Like, come on, I'm sorry, but no. And what that tells me is that if Errol Spence was able to go through with that, and he seemed pretty confident throughout the whole entire time, when it came down to it, well then, you know, either A, once again, you were way too stupid or you were way too arrogant. And, you know, what that tells me is that more than likely that Errol Spence Jr. was way more enough than comfortable to still accept the fight. So he thought that if he wasn't 100%, that he was pretty damn close to it and that he was going to win anyway. So I'm sorry, but no.
If we're having a conversation and having that dialogue, it is perfectly fine to say these things. Terrence Crawford, I keep saying it, he's a skilled technician. He finds a way to win. Props to him. I have him rated as the #1 fighter in all of boxing. But two things can be true. Errol Spence could have had in preparation some things that went awry, things that were amiss, and you're in there with the wrong person. That's okay to say. Like, for example, people just keep, oh, you're making excuses. Oh, Errol's excuses. For starters, Errol Spence, half of what's floating out there are other people's opinions. Errol Spence didn't say nothing about his ribs. He didn't say nothing.
Right, but how come when it comes to your favorite boy, Errol Spence Jr., how come it's opinions? But then when it comes to Fury or a Lomachenko or a Canelo or a Crawford, it's excuses, and people are just making excuses. So once again, this is why I like to review some of these videos, because there's no offense, and I like Boxing Ego. I think that he's actually has a very good channel. But at the end of the day, let's stop with these bullshit ass excuses, okay? And this is why I like to talk about it as well, because they always love to tell you this shit about how they keep the same energy. They absolutely do not, and this is proof in the pudding right here.
About Mount Charleston, these were opinions of other people, like Victor Conte, who works with Snack. And it's funny because Terrence Crawford, he almost plays this game where
Isn't that interesting once again? And I've probably said this several times by now, but isn't that very interesting whenever it came to Inoue, when he stated that the random drug testing was just too much, which I also agree is a little bit of a fishy statement, you know, even though he probably didn't mean much by it. But isn't that interesting that they love to bitch, moan, and complain about Inoue or Fury when he dealt with Daniel Canahan? But, you know, Victor Conte, who probably is still supplying many athletes with steroids because he was a former supplier of steroids, none of these guys talk about the athletes. None of these LDBC and new media channels. None of them talk about how Terrence Crawford, Demetrius Andrade, Shakur Stevenson, Devin Haney, Caleb Plant, and none of them talk about how any of these fighters are with the snack program. Isn't that interesting? And how some of their physiques look different and how they look stronger or sometimes faster or, you know, better after the snack program. Isn't that interesting how none of them talk about it?
he's sending shots at Errol Spence Jr. like, ha, ha, ha. I guess the Dallas Cowboys are injured too, ha, ha, ha. But your own guy, Snack, Victor Conte, made excuses. If having the conversation of what went wrong is a problem, aka if we're calling it making excuses, then Victor Conte made excuses because he's the one that said.
Yes, and you could very clearly say that. The point is, overall, once again, is that was there anything that was majorly debilitating Errol Spence? I don't know. But if it was in the eye. It could have been overtraining. It could have been that maybe he did some training mistakes. The year and a half layoff certainly didn't help him whatsoever. But was there any major injuries in this fight? Absolutely not.
And I made a video about it. You guys must check that video on the channel. But Victor Conte, in an interview with manager Marty, he revealed, he says, people want to know what the F was wrong with Errol Spence. Why did he look like that versus Bud Crawford?
Because Terrence Bud Crawford is better than him in every single category. It's just like that with Wilder and that of Tyson Fury. Many people were surprised that Wilder ended up getting dominated like that, and that's why so many of these channels, they tried to make these excuses about the, overall glove out of the padding and all sort of bullshit because they were so surprised and so hurt that overall their new their new major pro black figure that he ended up getting dominated in the way overall that he did. But at the end of the day, the reason why that happened is because Wilder had never been in the ring with anyone like that before. And he finally got in the ring with someone that was better than him. Besides punching power, every other category Tyson Fury was better in. The footwork, the defense, the head movement, the ability to fight forward and going back. That's why Wilder got so dominated in every single one of those fights because, or in mainly every single one of those fights because Tyson Fury was just better than him in every single category.
And he says,
and the only fight where Fury really took Wilder at least 100% seriously throughout that whole entire time was that of the second fight. And that's why, Fury didn't get knocked down in that fight at all. And then on top of that, Tyson Fury just was so dominant.
This is just my opinion because I'm going to tell the truth. I believe Errol Spence made a stupid mistake. He said Errol Spence, he came from Texas heat to Vegas heat, which are two different types of heat. And in doing that, that's one mistake. But further than that, he didn't acclimate to his new surroundings where the fight was to be had in a desert in Las Vegas. And it's a different type of weather. Plus, he ran up a mountain. And there's this thing called altitude sickness. So Crawford, he's not taunting Victor Conte. He's taunting.
I would have to see what Terrence Bud Crawford does in the latter part of his camps, but I know that Terrence Bud Crawford runs up mountains constantly. Terrence Bud Crawford is always going up mountains. He's constantly going up overall that, mountains in Colorado, especially if you, hear about him in the news over here in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. That dude is running up mountains constantly. You can take a look at his training methods. But once again, if you're talking about right before a fight, then maybe it might be a little bit of an issue. But I'm sorry, I'm not biting on it too much.
Errol Spence, he's taunting Errol Spence fans. So, like I said, to each his own. He's entitled to do that. He won. He can take the victory however he wants. But I'm just giving you my opinion. There's nothing wrong with looking at any situation. Like, for example, if you had a job interview and you totally bombed the job interview and you didn't get the job, meaning they're like, hey, we got to go with another candidate. Ego, you came in and you interviewed and it just wasn't a good interview. Doesn't mean you're a bad worker. It means when it all mattered at said job interview, you didn't show up. Now, you could say, oh, it's because I lack sleep, I lack preparation. It doesn't change the fact that you're not getting the job.
Right, I understand that, Mr. Boxing Eagle, but at the end of the day, the fight game and sports is that of two very different things. Because you trying to say this is basically you trying to say that Terrence Bud Crawford did not defeat the best version of Errol Spence Jr. And maybe it wasn't necessarily 100% the best version of Errol Spence Jr., who also knows if Crawford was 100% the best version of himself. I know for sure that he looked a little bit slower than what he had in previous years because he's starting to get older. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, you saying all this stuff about Errol Spence being clearly drained and that he wasn't anywhere near the same fighter and that I don't think overall that this version of Spence would even beat Porter and that we all know what that means, that that's a diminished win. Boxing Ego is trying to say that, oh, I'm not trying to change the result. No, well, you can change the result. Why would you try to change a result? Why would you try to change a result that's clearly out there as plain as day? It just is what it is. You can change the result. What happened, happened. But at the end of the day, that doesn't mean that a lot of people are not going to try and diminish it to, in a way, somewhat change the result, or overall, not change the result, but to make it seem like less of a win, or to make excuses to make the pain feel a little bit better.
It's just you're discussing what went wrong. Oh, I was insanely nervous because I really wanted a job. I mean, it's okay to have these conversations, but certain people, especially the Bud Buddies, they take it like this somehow hurts Terrence Crawford to have the conversation. Again,
Because it diminishes the win. And what that means is that when you're comparing him to other great fighters, what that means is that this conversation will always be had, at least in your view, that Terrence Bud Crawford did not have the same great win overall as many other guys did when they fought their generational fight. Because Canelo, when he defeated Golovkin, they were both at 100%. Ward, when he fought Kovalev, they were both at 100% or a great point in time in their career. And other fights that I'm sure I'm not mentioning. Mayweather or Pacquiao, whoever else you want to bring up. But then when Crawford fought Spence, there was stuff wrong with him. So it diminishes the win, and it makes it less valuable. And you know that just as much as I do, so let's not beat around the bush. Let's not try to fuck around here. You know damn well that it's making excuses, and you know why people are getting after you and other people for it. Because it diminishes the win. Just like you do a lot of the times with Canelo Alvarez, like, oh, good win, but, this guy had no power. This guy wasn't the same, blah, blah, blah. Oh, well, it doesn't change the result. Right, it doesn't change the result, but you know damn well what narrative you're trying to put out there. And you know that it changes the look of their career and that it makes them look worse and remembered as not as great as what they probably should be. And you know that just as well as I do, so let's stop.
I don't know what you guys want from me, but if you want me to not be transparent,
I'll tell you overall what I want from you, Mr. Boxing Ego. This is what I want from you personally. And once again, Ego's his own person, and to be honest with you, all these channels, they're pretty much, they're pretty much going to be as biased as what they're going to be. So it is what it is. But personally, what I would want from an analyzer is that overall, that if you're going to state overall this stuff about how Errol Spence, he clearly had something wrong, no problem. I wouldn't agree with you, but if you want to go on that narrative, no problem. But don't just do it for your boy Errol Spence Jr. Also think about that when it comes to Tyson Fury, when it comes to Vasily Lomachenko, when it comes to Canelo Alvarez or Terrence Bud Crawford. Do it with them as well. And don't just say that if they were to lose or if they don't look quite as good that, they're just making excuses. Be as considerate and open-minded with them as what you are with Errol Spence Jr. It's very clear that you're trying to be more open-minded to the idea that maybe something was wrong with Errol Spence Jr. because Errol Spence Jr. is one of your favorite fighters when it comes down to it. On top of that, you always had a little bit of a beef with Terrence Bud Crawford. You even said that as well, or at least in recent times you did, when it came down to it. and overall, you're a fan of Errol Spence Jr. It just is what it is. So if you're going to do this, then at least keep the same energy and be consistent with every fighter.
Audience after 10 plus years in this game, then unsubscribe right now because it's never going to happen. I'm going to tell you what I think, and you can take it or leave it. You can agree, you can disagree, that's fine. But I always support my claims and what I'm talking about, right? Crawford's a beast, he did his thing, but at the end of the day, in addition to him being a beast, it looked like Errol Spence had some issues going on. So the other thing is Errol Spence hasn't shown me, boxing ego, that he's a liar.
Right, but many other fighters overall in the past, they never had to lie. When it came down, they never had to lie overall. Before they ended up getting their ass completely kicked in that first fight. Why would he have to lie? He was completely undefeated in his profession. What reason would he have for lying? So it is what it is. I mean, some people might disagree with me, but I mean, Wilder, for example, like he made some excuses. Like he made the excuse that he was sick against Luis Ortiz, and that's the reason why he didn't look as good. But there was nowhere near the amount of excuses like what he had done against that of Tyson Fury when it came down to it. Lomachenko really didn't make that many excuses before he lost to Teofimo Lopez. So then that means that we need to 100% believe Lomachenko, that he had a debilitating shoulder injury, and that we need to also put that out there, right? That's what that means?
He has built up some integrity with, it should be everybody in boxing, but definitely me because I pay attention. I've covered.
And you're in love with him, and you're a fan of him. It just is what it is.
Crawford's career, I covered Errol Spence's career. So other performance, like let's say Ugas when the mouthpiece got knocked out, he didn't really make excuses. And people, he explained what went on, and
Right, he didn't make excuses overall. Well, actually, what Errol Spence did say is that he wasn't really paying attention, and that's the reason why he got hit. Now, you can take that as an excuse if you want to. You can take that as for real. That's up to you. You know, at the end of the day, it did look like Errol Spence Jr. to me that he had a little bit of a a little bit of an airhead moment. But at the end of the day, once again, of course, he didn't really need to make a major excuse because why would you need to make a major excuse in a fight where you kick the other guy's ass?
how his mouthpiece got knocked out, and he broke that down for you. No one said because he won the fight, no one said he was making excuses, right? Even though he did the same thing he's doing with the cataracts, is explaining what went on. And you have Crawford fans, the Bud Buddies, who are seemingly so fragile. They're so fragile that everything is taking away. It's just not a realistic standpoint.
It's a completely realistic standpoint. It's a completely realistic standpoint to say that you're making excuses when Errol Spence Jr. got his ass kicked so bad in that fight. But a part of the reason was, or the main reason overall why he was getting hit so much was because something was that bad with his eye or his eye was that compromised. Of course it is. And you thought the same exact thing when Lomachenko or Canelo was making excuses. But then when it comes to your boy Errol Spence Jr. or Deontay Wilder, all of a sudden you don't feel the same. So come on, let's stop the bullshit, ego.
It's okay to mention that Bud's a beast, but Errol had an off night. And that's what I truly believe, you know? And this is the thing. I'm not even saying Errol Spence could or would beat him in a rematch because the way the first fight played off, you got.
Isn't that also very interesting how Boxing Ego, he claims his shit about how Crawford beat not the same version of Errol Spence Jr., but then he has a problem with Naoya Inoue being mentioned as the number one pound for pound fighter, and they're just trying to tear down black fighters. Right, but there's been no excuses for Stephen Fulton. No one said that Stephen Fulton wasn't the same fighter. Now, there's been excuses now about, oh, well, he's not a great power puncher, and don't get me wrong, he's not a great power puncher. But at the end of the day, Inoue moved up in weight, and Fulton was supposed to have enough power to deal with that Inoue. Inoue, he didn't lose because of his lack of power. He lost because Inoue was powerful enough himself, and on top of that, better in pretty much every single category. That's the reason why Stephen Fulton lost.
Have to favor Crawford, most likely he will definitely be the favorite because it was a one-sided beatdown. Me, as a fair and unbiased boxing critic,
oh please, oh please, oh please, God is gonna strike you down after saying that. One of the biggest lies that I've heard.
I have to go off of what was shown to me, and despite me having an opinion and feeling like, oh, Errol Spence has a better effort in him, that's saying win, lose, or draw, I think he could do better. But he has some things he has to correct. But it's not even guaranteeing him a victory, which is my point.
He's not going to win in the rematch. He's not going to win in the rematch against Terrence Bud Crawford unless Terrence Bud Crawford either were to take him that lightly against that of Errol Spence Jr. And if Crawford does lose the rematch, I wonder if there's going to be any excuses for that of Terrence Bud Crawford. That he didn't look the same, that he looked slower, that he didn't look like he took it as seriously as what he did. Because every single time that there is excuses for fighters that ego doesn't care whether they win or lose, or he wants them to lose, then he says, oh, well, if they didn't prepare or if something's wrong with them, then that's their fault. They should have called back off the fight. Those are the standards. But then when it comes to a fighter that he likes, he's willing to give them excuses.
So I've never guaranteed Errol a victory in the second fight. I just think that sometimes you have.
And you can tell that the way that he's talking as well, I'm not guaranteeing Errol Spence a victory in the second fight, or yeah, Crawford will probably be the favorite. You can just tell that the way that he's talking, that he's just a major Errol Spence fan. It just is what it is.
What you call a perfect storm. And in that perfect storm, it's a combination of like Murphy's Law. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong and happens to go wrong. And
yes, when you face a fighter that's better than you in every single category, that tends to happen.
Unfortunately for boxers, in a championship fight, you got about 36 minutes. And if you had missteps in your training, in your processing, if you had miscalculations, if you didn't train hard enough, if you didn't sleep well, then at the end of the day, and you're in there with a great fighter like Crawford, this is what happens. So people overdo it and oversell it. The reality is we've all had bad days at work. You know what I mean? Like just customer cussed me out. I was late to work.
Right. So how come every single time one of your favorite fighters loses, it's always because it was a bad day at the office or they weren't quite necessarily the same fighter? But then when it comes to Lomachenko, Canelo, or Crawford or Fury, it's because they're either overrated or see they got exposed. So come on, let's stop.
I got into it with my coworker. My paycheck doesn't look right. It looks like they shorted me money. These things happen in life. And it's not about making excuses. I
Right, but it is making excuses.
personally just think Errol Spence has a better effort in him going forward. I don't even
He might have a better effort, but the question is once again about Errol Spence Jr. is that, and I don't possibly doubt overall that I don't doubt that maybe there was something up, with I don't doubt that there was maybe something up with that, of him possibly overtraining or something like that. But dude, at the end of the day, it's like, what, you're gonna sit here and tell me that your cataract was acting up that bad to the point to where you didn't push off the fight? I'm sorry, I'm just not buying it. The biggest fight of your career, like it's not even like it was a fight against Sean Porter or Danny Garcia or something like that. Like literally the fight that everyone's been asking for the past 10 years. This is the fight where you decide where something is majorly wrong with your eye or you can't see as well out of it, and this is the fight that you decide to go through with it, but you pulled out for the Manny Pacquiao fight. Like, dude, I'm sorry, I'm just not buying that.
know at this point if he'll rematch, if the rematch even happens, based on some of the tweets that are put out. But I'll save my judgment for that until more information comes out because I don't like to jump the gun prematurely. Oh, look, there's my video. Make sure you guys subscribe for all things boxing. But look, look, look at this is I reminded myself with the thumbnail that I made years ago. This is Errol's eye, and you can see him after the crash. His eye is bloodshot. So is it really that shocking that a guy who flew through a car is having issues with his eye when clearly immediately after? And I'm so glad this is a freestyle video.
Right, but that would make more sense once again had it been about a year afterwards. The problem is that Errol Spence had that car crash about 2 to 3 years ago, and he came back. He beat Danny Garcia in dominant fashion. Apparently, had no more problems with his eye. And then he saw it, I believe, like one or two more car accidents, but nothing anywhere near as severe. And then he ends up beating the shit out of Yordenis Ugas, who was a champion. And then people were like, "Uh-oh, Errol Spence looks back, and he might beat Terrence Bud Crawford." So I'm sorry, I'm just not buying it.
This wasn't rehearsed or planned. I just stumbled on it. You could look at his eye, and his eye is bloodshot. That's not normal. Before he got in this accident, his eye didn't look like that. So again, these are
Right, and that was probably that was probably overall once again right after the accident.
reasons why Errol Spence is believed by me. You know what I mean? When he's saying like, "Hey, I
Well,
got
he's believed by you because you're a major fanboy of him. It is what it is.
issues with my eye." I mean, I don't think he's just putting tape and gauze over his eye just because. You can see in that mugshot or whatever that picture that was in my thumbnail, you could clearly see something is up with his eye because it's bloodshot. And I'm so glad I just randomly seen that. So I don't care what y'all talking about. I still support Errol Spence. I still like what he's done. You guys can count him out and all this other goofy stuff. Crawford can take shots. And
Right, but the way that you're talking is the way that a wife talks about her husband when, her husband looks to be under some certain controversy or something like that. Like almost like how a wife talks about their politician husband, when he gets caught in a scandal. So it's like, come on.
try to embarrass him or
I still support him and I'm still going to be giving him all my love and support. Like, come on.
insult him. Sometimes, to me, saying less is more, and you already got the victory. So sometimes just being the man that got the victory, became 2x champion. That
Right, but Terrence Bud Crawford doesn't just have to sit back while everyone is making excuses and trying to diminish his win, saying that Spence was not the same fighter. So that's Terrence Bud Crawford's right as a fighter and someone that looks at himself as the best fighter of this generation and in the world. That's his complete right to say that he believes that fighters are making excuses or that other people are making excuses. That is his right.
might be better for Crawford's brand because you don't have to kick a man while he's down. But I'm a petty.
Right, but it's okay apparently to kick Lomachenko and Canelo and Fury when they're down. Remember that, folks.
Order carry out online
And AJ, Anthony Joshua, and other fighters that he don't like.
or by phone and get any one-topping pizza for $7.99 each.
But I'm a petty person too, so I don't know. Maybe Crawford just wants to be petty. It's on him. But sometimes You
Really not about being petty. It's really just kind of, it's really overall Errol Spence who started the pettiness.
don't even have to take it there. Your work speaks for itself. You beat him fair and square.
Right, the work speaks for himself, but then other people are trying to diminish the win. So then what that means is that Crawford then does have to speak up for his work. You know that just as well as I do, Eagle. You're not that dumb. So come on, let's stop.
No biggie. Let me know what you guys think. Subscribe to my channel for more boxing. I'm the best in the business, and it's not even close. Hit the subscribe button right now.
Anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. But I just thought that I would talk about that. And like I said, we have to be very careful overall with our analyzations. And we always have to make sure, are we fanboying or are we fangirling out here? And that's why I say I don't like to be a fan of any of these fighters. I'm a boxing fan, for example, because I love the sport of boxing. But at the end of the day, I'm always logical and objective first. We're always going to have a certain amount of bias because of the way that we look at things. But you got to make sure to strip as much bias overall and to put as much logic and objectivity in there as much as possible. At least that's what I try to do. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. We'll talk to y'all later.